Retaining employees is tremendously important in construction. And that's why I have my guest, Matt DiBara, back on Construction Genius. He's a fourth generation Mason. So Matt actually knows what he's talking about because he's lived it. And we dive into the importance of regular check-ins with your new employees to make sure that they're on the right track. We talk about how you can go through process improvement conversations with your employees so that when issues arise, you're not necessarily making it personal right away, but you're focusing on the process. And if you can improve the process and the person can buy into the process, then that helps with their activity and their performance, and then the retention of that person. We also have a very interesting conversation, and I want you to pay particular attention to this. It's later in the interview when we talk about how to handle toxic high performers. You know, those guys and gals in your company that make you a lot of money but have a negative impact on people in your organization. Matt has a very realistic answer to that question. It's a non-consultant type answer, and I think you'll find it tremendously helpful. So make sure you listen to that portion of the interview that is later on in our discussion. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius today. Make sure that you check out all the links in the show notes so that you can get in touch with Matt and enjoy my conversation. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Great to have you back on the show, and today we're going to talk about one of the major issues in construction. We all know that there's a shortage of labor, a shortage of talent. That's never going to go away, I don't think. And so it's critical that construction companies are able to retain the talent that they have. What are the biggest challenges construction companies have with retaining talent?
Well, I think that with retention, what we're really talking about, the clear end goal. So obviously there's the retention factor. So first we got to find them and keep them, right? We got to find the people and grow our teams and fill our empty slots. And then we got to retain them, right? We want them to stay for a long period of time, not just keep them today, tomorrow. But what we're really after is we're after maximization of each of the team members, right? Because the output is varying. If I have somebody who's not super motivated, they might output at 50% versus somebody who, if they love the role, they love what they're doing, they're in a great culture, they might do 2 or 3 or even 4 times output. So that's what we're after. And kind of the benchmark before that is, well, look, I got to keep my team first. And that's what we're saying here. And I think the struggle is in having construction as a whole, I think needs to catch up with the rest, a lot of the other industries in terms of building culture, in terms of making job sites fun, in terms of having a culture. If you ask a lot of construction companies what their culture is, or you poll their team members, interesting to find those answers. We've done it.
Okay, so it's interesting because what you're saying then is that in order to retain people, one of the keys to that is having a strong culture that attracts the right people and repels the wrong people. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, retention is broken down into many areas. One is communication, right? Defining your culture clearly, benchmarks and having measurable goals, right? If you're an A player, one of the biggest things is you got to know how to get an A. And so the more you can, A players, we've seen so many companies, it's interesting. We've seen a lot of the inability to retain A player talent is merely the inability to clearly measure, because A players love getting A's. And what I mean by that is if I'm great, I want to be, I'm used to getting pats on the back. I'm used to getting, hey, you're amazing. If I don't have benchmarks in place where I can be judged and hang my hat and say, look, I did this today, that creates difficulty in the workplace, especially for those great people. And then you create a breeding ground for mediocrity within your company, or you have the potential to do that.
I think one of the challenges that construction companies have is that, from their perspective, is that there aren't enough A players out there. So, they're unfortunately, from their perspective, they've got B and C players in, and they need them in because they need a warm body on the job site at least, even though it may not be the ideal scenario, and they actually are impacting their profitability that way.
I mean, look, I can speak from experience, and I can second that with my family business. We had that issue for a while, but I think that's where it comes down to doubling and tripling the amount of effort to bring those people in, because they do exist, they are there, and it comes in a couple different forms. It comes in training and motivating your C and B players. Typically, that's the first most important thing is defining your culture and having good communication. So somebody comes in. I'm a simple person, right? So if you were to boil down culture into its essence, culture is really the unspoken rules. So I know a company has good culture when I can shadow somebody being trained. Let's use my family construction company as an example, and I can hear them saying, "We don't do it this way," or "We do it this way instead," or "This is how we do things." It's these almost unspoken norms, promises that are made amongst the team. It's almost like an unspoken and oftentimes spoken promise of what you're going to get when you work here.
Okay, so the culture is defined then, but then you said something, and I just want to explore this with you. Training and motivating C and B players. I'll buy that B players can be trained and motivated. Can C players be trained and motivated?
You need to try. So what we found is benchmarks, right? So if I can't get a C player to a B player in a certain amount of time, then I need to make some hard decisions. But the problem is this whole thing doesn't operate in a vacuum. And what I mean by this is this concept of retention and culture doesn't operate in a vacuum. The most important thing, and I can speak from experience, is the ability to find candidates. You cannot operate and build a great culture in scarcity. If your mindset is, I don't have enough people, John's late, but I can't enforce the culture because I know that if I write John up, John's going to quit. And if John quits, I can't get the job done. You've already folded the deck of cards. So the most important thing is your ability to find and vet candidates. That builds your confidence to then do the things over here that need to be done.
Okay, so you struck on a very important word there, and it touches on what I call the short and curly syndrome. And what that is that I don't let someone go because they have me by the short and curlies. They have the leverage in the relationship because they know that I won't fire them because they see that I need them on that job, even if I'm performing at a low level. And you really hit it there, Matt. If I have a funnel full of candidates, then I have confidence to look at my C players and say, either you upgrade your game or we're going to have to make another decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's 5 simple steps. Like when we built the contractor hiring course, everything we do with outsourced hiring, which is actively doing this for contractors, is built around 5 steps. First, I need a clear understanding. What are the roles? What are the job functions, right? Then I got to find my candidates. I got to vet them. I got to hire, and I got to retain. In retain, there's culture, communication. Yep. We have a process with check-ins that works really well. We have another one called process improvement meetings. Really interesting how that's gone with kind of modern construction and the ability to critique without really critiquing. It's basically a concept of blaming the process, not the person always. So taking it from the perspective of process breakdown. But you got to nail it in sequence, right? You have to have that big candidate pool, because if you don't, you won't feel confident and you'll operate in scarcity. And so we can't go and fix the 4th and 5th step, right, if we don't have the first 3 down. So I'm presupposing at this point that we've got a nice long list of candidates. We have the ability to let somebody go if they're not meeting our standards. Now that's when this game really gets fun.
So that's interesting. I want to hit the check-in one. There's a quote I love from Hemingway. He said, "How do you go bankrupt? 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly." And sometimes I'm talking to my executive coaching clients and they're saying, "Eric, I just had a blow up with one of my PMs. He's having a real issue with X, Y, or Z." And then I'll ask them, "Well, how often do you have a one-on-one meeting with them?" And they'll say, "Well, once every 6 months or never." And so tell me what this check-in process is all about. And does that relate to what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most critical, think of a plane, right? The 2 most dangerous times, you're taking off and you're landing, right? When you get up to cruising altitude, things are usually smooth unless there's some turbulence unexpected. But it's the same concept with team members, right? It's like when someone's leaving or you're offboarding somebody, things can get real messy. Same thing when they're coming in. So when a new team member comes in, clear expectations of clear scorecard, how you get an A here. So if you don't have these things, these are huge opportunities. Then the check-in process, we have found great success, and with our clients, 2-week check-in, 4-week check-in, 90-day check-in. And then you can do a revolving 3 or 6 month. But what this does is it creates an environment where there's so many benefits to it. Number one is if you have somebody who's doing phenomenal, all of those, we highly emphasize that all of these check-ins, so 4 times in the first roughly 4 months, right? 4.5 months, I think it is.
2-week check-in, 4-week check-in, 90-day check-in. That's 3. What's the 4th one?
And then revolving, so either 3-month or 6-month. So that's for the entire tenure of the team member at your company. And what this facilitates is it facilitates many things. Number one is if they're doing exemplary work. I mean, we've had people 2 weeks in, they get a raise. They get another raise at, the 1 month check-in. They get another raise at the 90-day check-in. And they're just on fire. They're loving this, right? Other people, it creates the conversation early and often about improvement. Hey, so, being on time is really important. I know you've only been here 2 weeks. We get it. We understand. We're going to work through this. But boom, month later, hey, look, we're still having this issue. We want to, what do we need to do? How can we support you? Like the biggest thing in construction, one of the biggest things in our industry is to communicate early and often and to have a culture that allows for communication, that allows for good conversation. And, that comes down to managers being trained on how to handle issues. If somebody makes a mistake in front of 5 people, let's say you're a site super, and you're the PM and you walk on the job and you're like, what's this, what's that? And you're berating them in front of everybody else. It's not the way to do it, right? So all these important factors have to be respected and taken into account as well.
How can a construction leader who's having one of these check-ins, how can they get into the space of being a coach and really going side by side with the person that they're working with to make sure that they're, up-leveling their game as much as possible?
Well, I think it comes down to mindset. I don't work with, I work for anybody that works for me. I don't go into it that way. I go into it like I work for you. And my measure is, are you making more money? Are you growing? And I look at it like this. My number one thing is I either want you to grow in any of the companies I have, become a better person, a better human, right? All of those things. Or I want to know that if for whatever reason you do leave, that you leave and you're more valuable in the workplace, that you can go and find, one of the biggest ways we lose people in my construction company, I'll speak to the family business here, is they start their own companies or they move. And that's a testament to what we've done well because we've mentored and grown them. And I don't have any ill will against that. I mean, we develop them not just as in the work sense, but I think you need to look at it holistically. Like, what are your life goals? What are you trying to achieve on this big rock we call Earth? And when you look at that and you couple that with the mindset of, I work for you, right? And that's my mindset in the meetings is like, I'm here to work for you. How can I work for you to get this goal achieved? How do we get you growing? What is it that you want to do and how do we get there?
So how do you balance that I work for you perspective with the fact that, yes, but I do want something from you in your production? And so going back again to that short and curlies thing, because if I'm saying I work for you, then maybe, with the wrong type of person, they can use that as leverage or think they can use it as leverage.
Well, that's why you have to clearly define the goals and the outcomes first, right? Because it's like, this is where we're both going. Now I work for you to get there. And that hat, that metaphorical hat, I take that off when we leave the meeting, right? But it's really important. I think we lack empathy in the construction industry. I think we lack a little bit of, I grew up in the industry where it was like, the louder I got yelled at, the bigger mistake I made. That's what throwing stuff, job site fights. That was the culture. That was what I saw in construction 15, 20 years ago. Now things are changing. And I think when you can approach something from a genuine place of empathy, you'd be amazed at what I've personally been amazed at what we've been able to achieve for that. And it's the measurable outcome prevents what you're talking about, Eric, because when you have goals and timelines, it's impossible for somebody to pull one over on you because it's like, look, we said in a month we'd be here. We're a little short. Okay, we can work with that. We're halfway to the goalpost in full time. What happened here? We can't have this happen. And so that's that clear understanding part. When you define how to get an A and you both know that, it's the best thing in the world because they're walking into the meeting and they already know, look, I made a mistake or I'm not hitting the goals. And they're telling you why they're not hitting it before you even ask. But you have to take the time to define where we're going. And that's what's leadership's most important responsibility is what are we going after and what does it look like? And most importantly, is it measurable and manageable?
Let me ask you, going back to these check-ins, you got your 2-week, your 4-week, and your 90-day check-in. Is there any major difference between the content of the conversation in those different check-ins?
The tone. So it's 2 weeks is, hey, how are things going? What do you think? What can we help you with? Usually you're getting from, their direct report, some kinks. Basically you're trying to isolate you're trying to isolate things that stand out. So management, in essence, there's the middle line, then there's exceptional, and there's extremely poor. And so you're really trying to emphasize where are these two things happening. And so the tone of the check-in 2 week is very much like, how are you doing? After a month, it's like, hey, we're on the racetrack. We're a couple laps in here, excited for this 90-day. And then the 90-day is like, hey, so this is how this is going to look moving forward. So the tone changes, but the conversation is the same.
So in your mind, let's say, let's go to the senior levels of the company, and maybe we're not talking about someone who's just a laborer in the field or an apprentice or something, but let's say you've hired a project manager or a project executive, and they have multiple people reporting to them, or they're running multiple projects. Would your check-in frequency with them change in any way?
No, absolutely not. I would definitely keep it the same. And I think it's extremely important because the higher up you go in the org chart, the more critical it is that especially in construction, the more critical it is that you're catching things early and often. Because if they're not a good fit, if they're not doing things right, the damage is so impactful. It's the downside is so high because either they're upsetting many of your team members lower in the org chart, or they're upsetting many clients. So the potential downstream effect of, let's say, a laborer versus a senior estimator, project executive, operations manager, the downstream effect is much higher.
So what you're saying then is you feel that after that 90-day check-in, a check-in every 3 months or 6 months is sufficient. You don't need to check in more than that?
No. So these are formal, documented, procedural check-ins that are different.
I see.
So
okay.
Yeah, completely different. That's a big distinction. So these are what are your short-term and long-term goals? What do you find you enjoy the most? This is a very much procedural check-in, and it's meant to create space, because I think you should have lots of semi-formal and what I call informal check-ins. I think those are extremely important, but those are based on the person, the type, how they operate. I think everybody, especially if you want to scale a company, you want a standard that is blanketed across the board and is as foolproof as possible. And this method allows for something like that. And then you can adjust. I mean, we have some people that on a managerial side that are checking in a lot. They want daily. They want, it's their communication style, and other people but these are the mandatory baseline that I think if every construction company had something like this, they would find a better result.
One of the frustrations that a lot of construction companies have, particularly if, they're folks like my age, 40s, 50s, and you're bringing in folks who are, in their 20s, and they're talented, but they have different communication styles. They have, sometimes different expectations about what it means to be in the construction industry. What have you found are some effective ways to bridge those gaps between the older folks and the younger folks?
The check-ins that we just talked about. So the goal is, think of a car, right? Imagine you have a car and you got a lump in your tire. If you're driving that car at 10 or 15 miles an hour, you might not notice it, or it might be a little bit of a rattle. Get up to 45, steering wheel starts to shake. 65, 70, you're like, holy crap, this whole car is junk. So we found that if you follow a process like this, at the 2 week mark, little things should start coming up. Hey, you didn't get back to my text, or hey, I called you 3 times, you didn't answer. Well, I was busy working. Okay, moving forward, it'd be really important. Sometimes these calls might be emergencies. There has to be a way to do 2 things. Number 1, direct communication early and often. And number 2, indirect communication. So we have a thing called an honest employee audit, right? So we do this with all of our clients. And basically what it is, and the frequency varies, right? It can typically quarterly. And there's a special 1 to 10 scale. And we isolate all the key areas of a construction company. And it's how much there's different ones for like a managerial hire in the org chart, and then there's the main bulk of the company. And it's a 1 to 10 scale. And what it does is it allows executives and owners specifically to see, because how many times have you sat with a project, a senior estimator or whatever the case may be, a senior executive, and they're like, yeah, everyone's happy, everyone's good, jobs are on schedule. Boy, you get these honest employee audits back. How valued do I feel my hard work is at this company? Scale 1 to 10. 2s. Wow, interesting. How well does management take my ideas and feedback on how we can improve? 2. So I think you also need to balance the direct face-to-face communication with some indirect communication that allows you to get a good pulse on where the company is. And when you have these 2 frameworks, you can add whatever you want in the middle. That's your own secret recipe, right? All companies do it differently, and everyone does it differently based on the role they hire, how that person likes to communicate. But I think the goal is to establish some frameworks, some bumpers or safety nets. And those two things really expose a lot. I mean, it's hard if you sit down, as we mentioned, even in the first 6 weeks, twice, if it is that younger person versus older dynamic, things are coming up. I mean, that's very common.
So it's interesting because you're alluding there to the fact that you ask a leader, how are things going? The leader says everything's awesome. And that's based on the fact that that's what people are telling me, or they're at least telling me it doesn't suck. But then you do one of these audits and issues come up. Where are those gaps typically seen in those audits? Are there repeating patterns where the leader is kind of blind to certain things?
I think you have certain leadership styles and cultures where it's a little bit, I'll call it old school, right? I mean, that's what I grew up in, where it's like, we don't tolerate complaining. It's like, we'll figure it out, get it done. And sometimes that culture becomes embedded. I mean, that's what I grew up around. I mean, that was what construction was. It was like, hey, it's raining. It's like, great, got a rain jacket, And so when you really give them an anonymous voice, you tend to find that there are things, pay-related is one. And then I think the biggest kind of overarching theme is just feeling heard and empathy in construction. And there's ways it shows up. There's ways it shows up, right? Like, does my management value my, feedback and ways to improve? Is my hard work appreciated? Like, there's different ways we package it. But at the end of the day, it's like, look, I'm struggling, and I don't feel A, that I can go to somebody and they'll listen, or B, I've been going to them and they're not listening. And you, as as the owner or executives, really want to see this. I mean, it's sobering advice.
How do you advise the older generation folks when it comes, because in communication and construction, nothing beats going out to the job site and actually talking to someone, right? Or going to the customer's office. But a lot of the younger people, they're comfortable with texts, or they're comfortable with instant messages, or whatever the case is, and they don't seem to understand that this is a people business, and it's actually requiring that you either pick up a phone or go out to a job site. So how do you help the younger generations understand that, grasp that, and embrace it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one, right? Because I learned my family 4 generations. I learned the other way. I mean, I was shaking hands and kissing babies, right? I mean, that's what I was taught.
Right.
I think it comes down to culture, and again, how to get an A, right? Like, these are things we evaluate, and we implore companies whenever there's a position that doesn't work out for whatever reason. We employ them to write down every single thing they struggle with. Like, get it out. What do you not like? What are all the things you didn't like? And then we formulate that into standards and goals and KPIs so that you're explaining. I mean, like, you're front loading and preemptively saying, hey, look, so, I know sometimes it's easier. It's part of the onboarding. I know sometimes it's easier to shoot a text. At our company, we're a 4th generation family business. What our clients love is they love that shaking the hand. If a client has an issue and you just call them up and say, yeah, we'll take care of it, no problem. If it's a big issue in our company, we'd love it if you could go out there and just show face. I know it's silly. I know it's a silly, pointless thing. You waste an hour. But, like, for our clients, that's a really big thing. So, again, it's communication and standards, because then if it doesn't happen, I call it the North Star approach, right? You, Eric, can be wherever you are in the world. I can be wherever I am. You and I can both look and point at the North Star. Do you agree? Right? So
right.
We have to be able to look and point at something. So the more documentation there is around this, and that's what those reviews, the formal reviews, do, because you document, like, what are some areas where there may be improvements. Now, there's a process that piggybacks off this. So you touched on it, right? Let's imagine I did all these things. I established culture. They knew it. They were onboarded well. I did my 2-week check-in, but I got this younger person, 19 years old. They're not listening. We have what's called a process improvement meeting. So we sit them down. It's not a write-up. It's documented. And we advise that you sit down and you say, all right, so clearly the process is broken down, right? We want our processes that if a client has a big issue, that we go out there. That didn't happen. How can we improve this process? What needs to happen? Employee signs it. Supervisor signs it. And it's literally a written description of what that person thinks, what the other person thinks. If there's any kind of friction, then we get a senior leader involved to kind of pick it apart with them and say, all right, let's chew this up. Because if there's any opposing views, it's always good to have that tiebreaker. But what that does is it gives you a reason to sit down and it's non-threatening. It's a process improvement meeting, right? We have a process of going out and seeing clients when they're upset, but it forces the communication. So then you can go back now, John, we've had 3 process improvement meetings on handling big issues in person. Like, this is the 3rd one. What are we going to do? Because now people, person, or you see the crossover there. So it creates that communication, because in construction, my dad was notorious for this, right? He'd hold it in. He'd be like, hey, don't do that again, right? I'd be like, yeah, okay, no problem, right? He'd hold it in, and then he'd explode. He'd be like, you did it again, and then and so this creates that pressure release valve where a lot of owners, like my dad, like even me sometimes, it gives us the ability to be like, hey, can I have you in at 8 a.m. for 7:30 for a process improvement meeting? Yeah, so I'd really like to see this moving forward, boom, boom. And there's no way around it. And if you're high up in the org chart, executive, here's the nice part. This is what I do with my team. I come in and audit once a month. Hey, is everyone doing well? All the jobs on schedule? Great. Yeah, can I see the process improvement meetings? Oh, we didn't have any. Oh, interesting. But I thought we missed punch list on this job here. Oh, and I thought this one went over by a month. Well, we didn't. So now I have a way to keep my senior leaders accountable, because it's like, well, did you in the field, my PMs, my site supers, my foreman, so-and-so laborer didn't bring the laser level and da-da-da. Oh, great. Did you guys, I'd love to see the process improvement meeting you guys had. Oh, yeah, we were busy. I didn't. Okay. So I can't go in a meeting now if I'm talking to my foreman. How do we go in a meeting and stick up for you if we didn't have a meeting about the process and how we can improve it? He or she goes,
so then,
okay.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Sorry.
No,
go ahead.
It creates that conversation where it's ultimate accountability all the way through, and optics.
So then with this process improvement procedure that you're referring to, it sounds like a euphemism for people improvement, right? So I understand your logic in terms of not wanting to make it personal to the person. But when you say process improvement, what if I have a process in place that I know works and I don't want it improved, but this person's just not adhering to the process?
Well, that comes up in these meetings. So the biggest issue in construction is you blame. I find that it's best, right? They say innocent until proven guilty, right?
Right.
That's the legal jargon. Process until proven person.
Okay. Process
until proven person. So what I'm saying here is I'm saying the amount of times that I've looked at a situation, sat with senior leaders, and gone, oh, yeah, we're going to fire this person. In my head, right?
Yep.
We're going to fire this person. Yep. Then I see the sheet, and it's like, oh, wait a minute. They were supposed to drop this off. The truck broke down. This happened. That happened. Oh, my gosh, look at these tree roots that no one talked about. Look at the axes. Look at the material was delayed. And all of a sudden, I would say it's at least 50 or 60% of the time that the opinion I have going into it is not the opinion I have coming out of it when I see their story. So I believe that in construction, I'm not saying don't blame the person. I'm saying the person becomes much more clear when you first assume it's the process. And it creates a communication style. Process until person.
I really like that, because what you hit on there is that we do jump to conclusions rather rapidly. One of the reasons we do that is because we've built our business based on being decisive and being, in many cases, instinctive, and our intuitions have served us well. But sometimes with people, our intuitions do not serve us well. And it sounds like what you're describing helps me to get more information before I make a judgment.
100%, because I can look at a process improvement meeting now. I can look at a sheet and I can see, what did my site super say? What did my foreman say? And I can answer. I can say, do I have all the information to make a decision here now? Yes, no. If I don't, I can elaborate. Or I can put a sub-process in place that would alleviate this altogether. But it's far too many times that, especially if you take an overarching theme, which is that in construction, typically communication isn't the best, right? It's either because of some of the things that I mentioned, which is you say things and then it's like you're perceived as a whiner, and maybe they are, or maybe 3/4 of the team whines, so the 1/4 that's legitimate, you're like, oh, you're whining too. Like, there's all these nuances. Yeah, right. Blaming the process first is taking the assumption as a leader and saying, look, where did our goal break down? And look, there's plenty of times where it's the person, and here's the beautiful part. Sometimes, most of the time we've seen when it's the person, they admit it. They go, yeah, I just forgot. Okay, well, how do we not forget next time?
Yep.
How do we make sure we don't forget? And here's the beautiful part. It's documented now. So managerial, any type of terminations, it's like, well, so now it's like workers' comp stuff. It's like we let them go, and a week later there's a workers' comp claim. It's like, well, this is interesting. I had, 6 of these meetings in the past 6 weeks. And then all of a sudden this happened. Like it protects the company in so many different ways.
What do you do with toxic employees? And let me explain the toxic employee I'm referring to, because I think this impacts retention. So I have someone, let's say, who's maybe a foreman who's super talented, right? And they just kick ass and they bring in projects profitably. But because of just the way they show up, they have a tendency to drive other people away. And on the one hand, as a business owner, I'm like, dude, this guy makes me money. But on the other hand, I look and say, well, I lost 3 good guys because of the way he acts. That's a common occurrence in construction. How would you advise a contractor, a company owner, to deal with that particular situation?
A couple things. Number one is analyzing the behavior. So I would want to understand first, what are the toxic elements? And I'd really try and understand, is it something where what I call a blind spot in business, meaning is this person doing things that they don't necessarily see how impactful they are. So first I'm going to try and get a clear understanding, and I'm going to try and present to this person, hey, look, with data and numbers. So I really try and steer away from the ethereal, right? I want to be, so in the last, 2 months, I've put you with 6 different crews, and all 6 don't want to work. Like, what's going on? Well, they're all stupid, right? Let's just say they're all dumb. They suck. They're not good. I'm the best. Okay. All right. Well, how do you suppose we're going to get these jobs done if it's just you? Well, nobody wants to work hard today like me, and I bust my butt, and these guys are all idiots, and you put me with idiots. So the first thing I'll do, right? The first thing I'll do is I'll try and find, typically those types of people are, if they are profitable, it means they are bringing in jobs, at or under budget. They're working hard typically. They're not usually lazy, right? They're toxic, right. But they're like you're saying. So I would try and find somebody young. I would try and find a younger crew that wants to work with them. And I would say, look, here's the deal. Because we've had this in my company in particular. I have a few people right now that are like this. And we bring in a younger team and we say, look, this person here is great. They've got a lot of great talents, but they're a little rough around the edges. And I would try and bridge the gap between finding people that are really going to listen well and do what they're told, because typically that toxicity is like, grab this, do this, you're not listening, come on, what do you mean? And I would bridge that with them and saying, look, these guys, guys or gals, they're a little younger, they're learning. I know you're like to be rough, but can we be a little bit more forgiving for the fact that they want to learn and mentor under you because clearly you're the best? And so I'm trying to create a bridge between this person seeing empathy for the fact that they're young and learning, and also these younger people seeing that they get an opportunity to learn. And that strategy can work really well. And sometimes you just have to hit the nail on the head. You have to say, look, here's the deal. This is the stuff I don't like. It's documented. It can't happen. And if they go, well, I'll find a job somewhere else. I'll find a job before I go home. You're tasked with a tough decision. I try and take those people and I try and build a team. I call it a unique team or a special team. And we have those in my company where it just works, and I try and do smaller teams. So like I have someone in particular, one person they work with, that's it. Cause I eliminate the risk of multiple people and multiple opinions and things like that.
But then how does that affect my culture? Because on the one hand, if I say my culture is X, Y, and Z, but then I build a special team over here for my high performer who makes me money, doesn't the rest of the employees look at that and say, yeah, he talks about this, but then he does that?
Well, are they working together is the first question.
Okay.
Because what is culture? Culture is defined. Imagine they're on different. So I'm assuming right now, I'm presupposing they're on separate job sites. The only time they're seeing each other, team events. Right. And if you do anything together, if you do breakfasts or outings or things like that, other than that, it's like, who's picking up the truck, who's going to the job site. So I think that's the whole purpose is you have to quarantine that. You cannot allow that to be, you can't be mixing teams and mixing people with somebody who's toxic. Cannot happen. You will lose the downside risk is far greater. So I look at it like quarantine. Can I have a situation where this person can work on job sites with a small crew by themselves? They have their own way of operating like an island, right? They got things that they do, and guess what? It works for them. They're happy, And I try and establish that if it's a true A player. But I also, like I said, sometimes you got to hit the nail on the head and say, look, you did this. It's not acceptable. Is there, you can do a process improvement meeting, or it comes up during your check-ins, right? Where it's like, look, these things can happen. I'm very empathetic to the fact that it's very hard to find people that can run jobs profitably or do that level of talent. So we try and find ways that are imperfect but allow for the productivity that we need, because that's important too.
So it's interesting because, Matt, what you're just saying here is not something that would be necessarily put into a business book, right? Because what the business book would say is establish your culture, insist on your culture, and attract people who are fit for the culture, repel people that are not. And what you're looking for is a monoculture throughout your business. But what you're saying is that, yes, let's say 80% of my business or 90% of my business has this culture, but because of the nature of construction, if I can do that quarantine process and do it successfully, then I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, I think we have to live in the real world in our industry, because at the end of the day, if the downside is, look, I fire this person, I'm going to lose $300,000, I'm going to ruin a relationship that's worth $5 million a year, and look, Mike over here is a new laborer, right? Or I've got 3 new people, I've sat them all down, I said, hey, I'm going to put you with so and so. But again, this presupposes one very important factor, which is there has to be incredible value embedded with some of these thorns, right? It's the rose thorn analogy. Because if this person is a little bit harder and a little rough around the edges, and I can soften them a little bit by saying, look, this is a young team, I need you to go a little, and at the same time take a younger team and say, look, I'm giving you a golden opportunity. This person here, if you do listen and if you guys get along and find your rhythm, you will be an expert at this in 2 to 3 years. I don't have any other crew that can train you this well, but he's got to like you and he's picky. Like, I'm trying to find what I call creative solutions, because at the end of the day, there is no one size fits all in construction. We're we're a different breed of people, and we're trying to mix all personalities and styles and union and non-union and backgrounds and, East Coast, West Coast. You're trying to meld all these different things. Like, I'm in masonry, right? Like, you got union people that are like, joints have to be struck, and then your 45-degree brush, and then I got people who learn pride. Like, you have to live in the real world.
I appreciate that, Matt. I think that was an excellent insight there. I just want to make a bookmark there for all the listeners. That past 4 or 5 minutes is tremendously important as you're thinking about working with people in your organization. So what stops a contractor from addressing the retention issues, even if they know they exist?
I think that with retention, it's accountability, right? So I used to think years and years ago, I'd be like, their loss, I'll replace them, right? And so now if somebody leaves, I really ask myself, unless it's clear that they left, right? So if I look at the last few people that have left my company, one's wife got a job at Amazon, unbelievable job. They were relocating. He's like, look, sorry. I was like, I support you. We had a nice party. So if I look and if they're not leaving for some type of ascension, they're starting their own business, there's something out there that I can't offer here. Like, I can't, you can create a mini business within my business, but you can't have your own business. So if it doesn't meet that criteria, then I take accountability, because they're on my payroll. And so there's some level of saying, well, I wanted them here.
Yep.
So I have to analyze this holistically. And sometimes it comes to a couple conclusions. One is, well, they weren't that great altogether, and I just didn't have a better way of replacing them. Or what I usually find, which is we dropped the ball. There were some areas where we can improve. And so I always wear the hat of accountability first. I say, me before them. So I look at if I'm going to assume blame, where could I assume blame?
Yeah.
And I would look at it and be like, did we do our check-ins? Did we do all the important communications? Were the honest employee audits coming in well? And if all that looks good, then it's, there's not much you can do. But I think it's the accountability, and it's also measuring retention. So how many companies measure how many team members they have, how long they've been working there, how many raises or growth milestones they've gotten. Not all of them are financial.
Yep.
And I think when you do that, you start to see, we've had companies where we look at it and we go, your average tenure at this company is 9 months.
Yep.
Average. Does that seem like is that what we're going for?
Yeah.
Owner will go, well, no, of course not. So it's kind of that blind spot off in the corner. And when it becomes measured, it becomes managed.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit more about your company, Matt, what you do and how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so the company's the Contractor Consultants. We created the first ever contractor hiring course, teaching a lot of what we just talked about in partnership with ZipRecruiter and Indeed. And then we have what's called outsourced hiring. So we take all of the headaches off your plate, and you just show up for final vetted approved interviews. So we've got a couple really unique services in the industry. But if you're looking to hire, we can certainly help you out.
And how can people get in touch with you?
The website, thecontractorconsultantsplural.com.
Excellent. We're going to have links in the show notes. So basically what you do, Matt, is you help to fill the funnel of qualified candidates so people don't have to hassle with that and they can focus on building projects. Is that what I'm hearing?
100%. So we do the job postings, the screening. We contact all the candidates that come in within a few minutes because we have a dedicated team. We pre-screen based on your criteria. We design skills assessments so that you can validate their skill set before hiring them, do the background checks. So all you do is show up for that final vetted approved interview, the one that should be on your calendar.
So tell me, as you're looking at the industry, what is your view of what the construction industry will look like in 5 to 10 years' time in terms of workforce participation?
I think we're at a turning point right now. I think that if bigger companies, and we're in talks with some of them, start to really get involved with sponsoring the next generation, and not individually, I mean like holistically, like sponsoring a movement around the next generation of skilled trades, I think we can revive this, but we're it's a plane that's crashing, and we're a couple hundred feet from the ground here. So I think like we're working with Skills USA, for example, trade school organizations. So I think if we work together and we get the big massive corporations involved with these kind of trade organizations, we'll do all right. But it's going to be an interesting bumpy ride, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear that sort of, there is a level of uncertainty there, right? Because I think there needs to be fundamental changes in the educational system, particularly in terms of how vocational work is viewed and promoted at the elementary, high school level. I
couldn't agree more.
And it's also interesting because in construction, there are associations and there are the banding together of companies, but because we're so competitive, it is kind of tough for companies to band together on these types of initiatives. Is that right?
I mean, I think we need to take it top down and bottom up. I think it needs to be, like you said, I mean, we need it at the congressional level. I think we need it at the state level, the city level, the town level. You need it with small, medium, and large corporations. I mean, we need to understand how important it is to have people who can do this type of work. I mean, I think it's just we take for granted. We're saying it's bad and the numbers are trending that way, but it's like, well, I still get my water heater replaced, or I can still build commercial projects, right? If I'm let's say I'm a car dealer and I'm like, well, I still get my project done, but there's stress fractures in the beam, and this is going to be a sudden rupture.
Okay, great. Matt, real quick, just tell us, you're down in Southern California, is that right?
Yep, Los Angeles.
Okay, so if I'm in LA, what's the one restaurant I got to hit in LA?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't remember what I said last time.
Give me a new one. Give me a new one.
There's an Italian restaurant called, how fitting, called Ca del Sol. That's really good. I like that one.
And how do you spell that?
C-A, I believe it's D-E-L-S-O-L-E.
Great. Ca del Sol. We're going to find that on the internet. So if you're in LA, that's the best place to go. And what kind of food do they have there?
They got everything. It's an Italian restaurant though, so all your common Italian eats.
Oh, there it is. I pulled it up. There will be a link in the show notes. Oh yeah, Italian eats. That's awesome. But now, okay. So if I'm there for dinner, what am I gonna order?
That's tough because I'm Italian. So it's like depends on my mood. I might do like I don't know. I'm pretty simple. I like a good. Gosh, what would I get?
Dude,
there?
I'm looking at the menu here, man. There's this gnocchi al pesto, the homemade potato dumplings with basil pesto. That sounds really good, right there.
That's the one.
Awesome. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes. We really appreciate you coming on, Matt, and I really do appreciate that perspective that you gave on the sort of the quarantine outlook. I think that's something for people to really consider. So that's tremendously valuable. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Just a quick shout out for Matt's website, thecontractorconsultants.com. If you're looking to fill your pipeline with talented candidates for your company, Matt is a good resource for you to check out. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. I hope you found this episode helpful as far as enabling you to retain your employees. Please share it with other people that you think would benefit from listening, and also give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll catch you on the next episode.